Earlier today, I was browsing through YouTube looking for fun retro videos to watch when I happened upon Clint's video over on LGR talking about the Gateway Astro. And I thought, this looks pretty familiar. And sure enough, I went out to the garage and sitting there on my floor was this Gateway Astro that I had picked up a couple of years ago and been planning to do a video on for quite a while. Later on in that same episode, he mentioned the Gateway Profile 2, and I thought, that looks pretty familiar. And so again, I went out to the garage, and it just so happens a few weeks ago, I happened across a Gateway Profile 2 at eWaste. So with this great coincidence going on, there was no way that I couldn't do an eWaste Wednesday episode without talking about these two machines. Will they work? And what's the difference between these two machines? We're going to find out today on the Retro Hack Shack. So here's the first computer on the lineup today. And as I said, this is the Gateway Astro. And if you haven't seen Clint's video over on LGR, I would recommend watching that first. He did such a good job with that video that I can't do it any more justice than he did. I'll link it in below or put a link up above or somewhere so you can go find it. But yeah, this is a pretty neat little computer. Originally, I got this about a couple of years ago, and the thought was that I would do a video comparing this to the iMac, and I just never got around to it. I didn't have an iMac at a time. Now I've got like 3 of them or something. But you know, I just never got around to making the video, and it sat here in the garage, and it's quite dusty, as you can see. So there's really only 2 things that I would mention on top of what Clint said in his video about this particular computer. One is that it does have, it's got these little speakers here, but it does have these little pop-out things in the side here. I think I can get them off. And yeah, it looks like these could be used to attach larger speakers to the side. So I don't know if it ever came with larger speakers that fit on the side of this but there's one on both sides. So this was obviously meant probably for hanging speakers, because that was very typical back in this time period, to have speakers attached right to your monitor. And the other thing that I would mention, at least I don't remember him talking about this, is the weight of this particular computer, because basically you can imagine having a CRT and a computer all in one. So if you were going to your friend's house, let's say, and you wanted to take your monitor and your desktop computer, if you can imagine stacking those two on top of each other and trying to carry both of them at the same time, that's what it feels like to carry this thing. It is super, super heavy. So beyond that, though, he did such a good job. Like I said, not much really else to say about it from a historical standpoint or an overview standpoint. I just want to see now if I can get this thing working. One difference in this machine than in his machine is that this one does have, I believe, the original hard drive. We'll take a look in a minute and see if it's there. So I think the first thing we need to do is just plug this in and see if it's working. Okay, so interestingly enough, when I plugged this in, I heard the monitor, some high voltage come on the monitor, just when I plugged in the power cable. Let's hit the power button and see if it turns on. Nope, nothing. Let's try holding down the power button maybe. Nope, nothing. So perhaps this particular computer is plagued with the same thing that Clint's was, which is just a dead CMOS battery. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's go ahead and pull this thing apart, and we'll see if changing the CMOS battery brings us back to life. Now, if you haven't seen his video yet, one thing he mentioned is that this, basically the computer's in the bottom here, and the display, the CRT, is just the top part. And there are screws on the bottom you can take out, which will detach the computer part from the rest of the chassis. Okay, let's stand it back up. Ooh. I kind of like the way that comes apart. I guess I'll have to be careful putting it back together, because this card here is what carries all of the video signals and things back up to the monitor itself. And I wouldn't want to hurt that, but I really like the way this is configured, actually. I wasn't expecting this. All right, just one screw to get off the shielding. And just taking a look at the internals, it's laid out pretty tightly but neatly. We've got the CPU back here, some memory, just a single stick of memory. Got the floppy drive up here, Samsung CD-ROM here, and then the hard drive here. Everything kind of neat and in its place. So I have a feeling I'm going to have to take out the hard drive to get to the CMOS battery. Nope, I was wrong. The CMOS battery is actually underneath the RAM here, and that's quite a pain to get out without taking off the top part, the top brackets here. It is possible, but you really kind of have to wiggle the memory around to get it to come out. And here's the hard drive. It's a Quantum Fireball 4.3 gig hard drive. So that should hold plenty of stuff. I mean, it's not the highest that was available at the time, but it's a good size for this type of machine. So like I said on Clint's video, the only thing that was wrong was his CMOS battery was dead. So let's, change the CMOS battery. I'll have to dig that one out. That just went flying. Reassemble the RAM and the hard drive. Carefully reattach the monitor. Hook up a USB keyboard and mouse. Plug in the power. Hey, I didn't even have to push the button in. It's coming on, guys. Look at that. CMOS settings wrong. Memory size decrease. Interesting. So yeah, here we go. Intel Celeron processor, 400 megahertz, 64 meg of system RAM. So I guess the moral of the story is if you have one of these PCs from around this time, especially that particular motherboard, BP8, I believe this refers to the motherboard here, BP8 1010A, or something similar with the Celeron processor in it, make sure you replace the CMOS battery. It's always a good practice, a best practice. It's one of the first things that you do. Make sure you replace that first. But yeah, this is looking good. Let's go to the setup. Everything looks good here. I could fix the system time, I suppose, but why bother? I just want to see, now that this is working, kind of what's on here. So let's go ahead and save configurations and exit and see if this boots up. It does have a Windows 98 sticker on it, right down here. Intel inside, Intel Celeron. Ooh. A hard drive was not found. Consult the troubleshooting section of your user manual. Okay, so definitely something wrong with the hard drive. And I wasn't lucky enough to get a CD in the CD-ROM drive. Mine is empty. So I'm going to replace that with this Western Digital 40 gig drive. I'll just pop my homemade Windows 98 CD in here and keep our fingers crossed.
Many unbearable hours later.
Hey, there we go. Finally. All right, so I finally got the sound working. I went through about 20 different sound drivers because they're all different. And a lot of the later versions of the sound driver don't have this particular chipset, the sound chipset that you need. So these are the drivers that you need. This one here is the first one is the audio sound driver. And I'll put links to these if I can down in the description below. But it's this 7507641. If you look that up with Gateway Astro or SoundMax, you should be able to find that one. This is zip file. Just unzips this one file here, but that's the file you need to search for there. This is what you need to search for is Intel 810 chipset. Intel 810 chipset. Don't look for BP 810. That won't work. Intel 810 chipset and look for this version. That will uninstall this INF, INST, blah, blah, blah file. And that will install all the chipset stuff for you. And then this last one is the audio driver. So look for Intel 810 graphics chipset, and you should find this Win9X E67.exe. Those are the graphics files, or those are the driver files that worked for me to get everything up and running. I still have an undefined PCI card in my devices, but I don't see, it's not affecting anything. So everything else seems to be working now, including the sound. So just a hint, if you're ever setting this up on a similar board, perhaps these drivers will work for you. And just to test out the sound a little bit more, we can play a little Canyon. And of course, to test out the graphics, we need to play just a little bit of Doom. So at the end of the day, all it was that battery fix. Same thing that Clint had over on LGR. So I was really glad I took a second look at this, and I appreciate LGR for spurring me on to check out this system. All right, so now let's move on to what Clint from LGR called the successor to the Gateway Astro, the Gateway Profile, or more specifically, the Profile 2, which he featured an ad about in his video. The Profile 2 was positioned more of as a business class machine, so it'll be interesting to see what the differences are between the Astro and the Profile 2.
The new Gateway Profile 2 PC. With the computer and monitor in one, it fits neatly on your desk, which leaves plenty of room underneath it. Featuring the Intel Celeron processor. Call 1-800-GATEWAY.
If you're as excited as I am to find out about this Gateway Profile 2 and what it can do, hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. It'll tell YouTube that you liked it, and also other retro enthusiasts like you might also like it. So hit that like button, and I thank you very much. So the biggest difference that you can see right away on this Profile 2 is this big, nice LCD screen, which is much different than the Gateway Astro, in that the Gateway Astro obviously was a CRT, so it was a lot heavier. This is still somewhat heavy, but you know, it's less than half the weight of the Astro, just because they got rid of the CRT and they've got this nice LCD screen here. Now, just underneath the LCD screen, we have a CD-ROM drive, it looks like, a floppy drive, a power button, looks like a headphone jack there, and this, I'm assuming, must be a microphone, and then two speakers. We'll see if this sounds any better than the Astro did. Still not a ton of ports, though, similar to the Astro. There's a couple of USB ports on the side here. There is a couple of USB ports in the back. This has a networking port, which the Astro did not. The Astro did have a modem port. I didn't point that out, but it did have a modem port, and this does as well. So when you use the handle on the iMac, it does tilt up, and that's just kind of the way you're supposed to carry it. This is kind of the same. When you pick it up, oh, I can't pick it up at that angle, but yeah, you kind of carry it like that. And it's not the best in the world, but it's certainly a lot easier to get around than the really heavy younger brother, or whatever, the Gateway Astro. And let's see if it also is plagued with that battery issue that the Astro was plagued with, but it's plugged in. Let's just go ahead and hit the power button and see what happens. I'll hold the power button down for 5 seconds just to make sure nothing happens. Nothing at all is happening. So at least with the Astro, I was able to tell when I plugged in the computer to the wall outlet that the monitor did get some high voltage automatically. And in this case, with the LCD, you know, everything is probably controlled by the switch, so we're getting nothing. So it looks like we're going to have to take this apart and at least change out that CMOS battery. Okay, so the real question is going to be how to get into this thing. I tried to find service manuals and other things online, and nothing, nada. I found one thread on one forum where somebody was asking for help, and the guy was about to resort to trying to pry welded plastic apart and things like that. And somebody else chimed in and they're like, oh, I figured out how to do it. If you want to know, respond to this and I'll tell you. And that was like in 2013. So I'm going to take a look at this and see. I do see some holes where some screws go. But I'm going to have to take a good look at this and see. Maybe I'll just start pulling out screws until the thing falls apart. We'll see. Similar to the Gateway Astro, there is a little booby hatch here in the back, which I'm sure is for the hard drive. I've unscrewed the screw. Luckily, that screw will stay in there. It won't come out, so you won't lose it. But yeah, there's the hard drive. So if we wanted to change the hard drive out, if that was the only thing wrong, or maybe we wanted to do an upgrade, it's right there and easy to access. And it looks like it even has the same sled, perhaps, that the Gateway Astro had. Aha. Now we're getting something. There we go. So this little piece here, maybe you can see, it's like a cowl that goes around the monitor, and it has these little clips here. So once I found those, was able to get this cowl off, and now I think I can take the LCD off the front, and it looks like it has some connectors here. Not sure if you can see those. So right down in there, there's some connections, some plugs where the monitor connects to part of the computer. So I think if I can take the panel off, it'll simply unplug, and then we'll be able to really get somewhere. And there's a close-up of what that looks like. The monitor had hinges that went down in here and screwed into this bracket, and then here's where the those cables plugged in. It looks like there's an adapter board. Okay, finally, slide the PC out of the case. Definitely the worst disassembly I've ever had to do. It's taken me over an hour to get this thing out of here, and it's still a solid brick of metal. The motherboard is in there, but it looks like there's some screws around here. Maybe the motherboard comes out easier than I'm hoping. So after removing about 20 more screws, I finally got down to the motherboard, and surprise, surprise, it's the exact same motherboard that was in the Astro, just with some different connection cables and with the addition of the physical port for the Ethernet jack. That was it. This is basically the exact same board that was used in the Astro. Just a quick tour around the board here real quick. Obviously we have the processor over here, Celeron processor, memory, that battery I mentioned, which is just underneath the memory. And then we've got a single IDE connector, a single floppy connector, power over here, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's no real exciting features on this board. As I said before, it's pretty generic. I did notice on the capacitors that there is a little check mark on each one. And if I had seen this in any other system, I would say, oh, somebody's been in here. But I can pretty much guarantee you that nobody's been in this thing because it is a pain in the butt to take apart. So maybe when they were doing QA, they marked these as good capacitors because maybe they knew that they were getting burned by bad electrolytics, SMD electrolytics on other systems in the 90s. Maybe they wanted to make sure these electrolytics were good before they put them in. I don't know, but there's a check mark on each capacitor. And one of the reasons this was so hard to get apart was this little notch down here. I had to pry this, whatever, dog ear or whatever backwards, because the bottom of the case, they had put this special little notch here. For whatever reason, I don't know. 20 screws holding this little bottom part together apparently isn't enough. What were they thinking? People were going to play football with this thing or something? Anyway, they put this little notch here, so you actually have to bend this ear backwards in order to get the plate out with the motherboard. So it's, yeah, pretty crazy. Now here's the power supply. It's actually, the power supply is built into the neck of the unit. The power comes in the back, but then it's passed through with a cable up here up to the actual power supply again, with a board that's mounted in the neck of the unit here. And there is a fan. The fan, interestingly enough, is positioned right down here at the bottom. I'm assuming that that blows air up this way and then maybe out the back where the handle is in the case. So pretty interesting. One thing I want to do before I do anything else is I want to test this power supply and make sure it's good, because if it's not good, I'm not moving any further with this thing. I'm not going to put it back together. It's too much of a pain. But I do want to test this out, maybe with a hard drive attached, just to see if it will actually work and that there's no issues. And I want to put this thing back together and find out that I had a power supply issue. And the other thing I'm wondering is what happens if we just leave the CMOS battery out altogether? Is that the same as having a dead battery in there? So I'm going to test that theory out too. My guess is that if you take the battery out, it's going to act just like a dead battery and it won't start up. But what I'm trying to avoid is somebody else 20 years from now having to go back in, and, or not even 20, probably 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, having to replace this CMOS battery because the thing won't start. I'd like to keep it out of the landfill. I mean, who knows? This thing was not tremendously successful. So at some point it might be, museum piece. Hey, this thing only sold 10,000 units or something. I don't know. But yeah, taking this thing apart is so much of a pain. I want to test what happens when you leave the CMOS battery out. So those are a few things I'm going to try to do here on the bench before I reassemble it, which will mean kind of precariously dangling things probably together to get this thing to turn on, hopefully, while it's disassembled like this. Now, in order to test the power supply, you first have to hook up a little jumper because these ATX power supplies are used to having a switch that goes between this green wire and the black wire somewhere on the motherboard, and it probably leads right up to the front panel somehow, so that when you press the button on the front panel, it actually switches on the power supply. In this case, we don't have that connected, so you have to bypass that just by shorting out this green wire with one of the black wires. And then when we plug in the power supply, if everything's working, it should just come on. And so in order to do that, you just need a thick wire. I've used paper clips in the past for this. There we go. So I've just got a thick copper wire that I bent over, solid core copper. But yeah, paper clips are okay. Sometimes paper clips become oxidized though on the outside, or and so I find that copper works really well. I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, if all you have is a thick paper clip, that'll work too. Just cut it off, bend it over at the right, to the right width, and you can stick it in, the bottom of the power connector here. Just make sure you have the right 2 wires. And there we go. Make sure you're making good connection there. And when we plug this in, it should turn on. Let's see what happens. All right, here we go. Fingers crossed. Yep. There we go. I can hear the fan running, and the hard drive did spin up. So unlike the Astro, which had actually no activity on the hard drive, at least this one is spinning up. So that's a good sign. Because remember, when I turned this up and hit the power button, there was just no activity. So that really could have been a bad power supply. Doesn't necessarily indicate the battery. Definitely could have been a bad power supply. So let's go ahead and test out these rails and also make sure those are good before we do anything else. Okay, this should be 5 volts. And we get 5.1, which is great. And then the yellow wire should be 12 volts, which I believe is down here. There we go, 11.45, that's fine. And there's also a 3-volt rail, that's the orange wire. And there we go, 3.3. It is a 3.3 volt rail, not 3 volt. So yeah, everything's looking good in terms of the power supply. All right, so I've taken the battery out now, the CMOS battery out completely and plugged it in, and as expected, I get nothing. Not a thing. So it's got to have some sort of voltage sensing circuit in there that's detecting that voltage over a certain amount, probably north of 2 volts or something, or maybe even 1.5 volts. I don't know what it's set for, but it has to sense some voltage on the CMOS battery before it will even allow the thing to start up. So that's a big pain in the butt. But it is what it is. So we'll put a battery in there for now, and maybe it can be somebody else's problem next time it runs out. All right, I have everything kind of precariously connected, I think. I don't have, the only thing I didn't plug in, I think, is the audio ports and the USB ports on that side. But this should be enough to allow us to see if the system works, if the display works, if the CD-ROM drive works, for example, the floppy drive. So let's plug this in. Oh, and it came right on. So the PC's on. There we go. Oh my goodness, I was so worried that wasn't going to work. And it does seem to be working. It found the no keyboard, yep. Let's see if it's just going to boot at this point. Let's just see. Yeah. Well, at least it's ejecting. And when I push it back in, the light's flashing like it's trying to read. It doesn't mean that the CD-ROM's going to work. But this appears to be working just with the battery replacement. Again, wow, what an awful design, especially for, I mean, it's one thing when you have the Astro where the top just lifted easily off, right? 4 screws, lift the top off, take the shielding off, change the battery, put it back together. You know, a trained computer technician could do that in, 5 minutes. But here, there's no way. right? This was basically, it seems like they made it as a disposable product. I would say it's not even really serviceable, except for maybe the display, which once you know what you're doing, you could take that off pretty quickly, connect a new one up. But to service anything on the motherboard, no way. There's no way. So yeah, okay, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to reassemble it, and we'll get a keyboard and mouse connected and see what happens. The thing that really gets me about this poor serviceability design is, there's no room for error. All of these screw holes have to line up exactly, like this one's not lining up at the moment exactly for me to get that screw in there. The cables are, within just barely able to get, unless you have a special tool, just barely able to get a finger in there to take these cables in and out or plug them back in. There's no tolerances at all for taking this thing apart. If you have to get the CD-ROM out to change it, if that's busted, you have to take off, like, there's 2 more layers of metal inside the case that you'd have to drop down and take out in order to change you can't even get to the screws on the side. You have to take all the metal out on the inside of this metal in order to change the CD-ROM. So that's the thing that just amazes me about this, is that they really weren't paying attention to or expecting anyone to ever want to get inside to this thing. So they built it to last for whatever the life of the CMOS battery is, essentially. All right, I'm almost done with reassembling this part of the case. And one of the clips over here isn't quite clipping on correctly. And this is another example of the over-engineered, for no reason, let's try to keep people out of this case method that they chose, because you can they've got these screws right here that hold the case to the frame. They didn't need all these clips anyway. So by the time I get this screw in here and tighten it up, this case is going to tighten right up along with the screw. So again, no reason for those clips. I think if you have one of these and you're sadistic enough that you want to take it apart, don't worry about breaking these clips here. If they do break, these screws should hold it into place. Be careful of the ones on the bottom, but the ones on the side here, if they break, no big deal. You can just go in and put these screws in, and it should pull everything together. And before I put the monitor back on, I did go ahead and clean this part of the case, because it's really hard to get to with the monitor on. And I also cleaned the little cowl that goes over this part here. We're getting close. I can feel it. Oh, look at this. Protected by Gateway Go Back by Wildfile. Interesting that it's rediscovering all of these. Oh, is this on? Mouse not working? Keyboard not working. Why is that? Let me try to plug that in the back. Nope, it looks like this has locked up. Oh, what happened there? Oh, the screensaver came on. So the keyboard is not responding. Mouse is not responding. But the computer is running. And it's got this, the aquarium screensaver, which is awesome. What a pain. Okay, here we go. 64 mega RAM. Exactly the same as the other one. Exactly the same as the Gateway Astro. So it's the same crappy BIOS with absolutely no options in it at all. This does confirm it's pretty much the same BIOS revision. I don't know about the minor information here, but it's the same BIOS version as the Gateway Astro. And this is the 433 megahertz Celeron. There was a 500 megahertz option that you could get, or that they sold at some point. But yeah, no options in the BIOS really to do anything. At least the keyboard is working in the BIOS though. So that's something. So as you can imagine, having only USB ports available for input devices, no PCI, no serial connections, presents somewhat of a problem when the USB drivers aren't working. So I tried a bunch of stuff, but it took me several days actually to go through trying different drivers, deleting all the devices, changing various BIOS settings that I could find anyway. installing the drivers for the Astro to see if they would overwrite whatever problem was going on, editing the registry to delete certain startup files using msconfig to change the way that the system started, doing a step-by-step boot process. I also tried installing the network drivers to see if I could get something like VNC to work. That way I could use a virtual session to move the mouse and use the keyboard. I even tried installing a non-official service pack to see if I could somehow overwrite what was going on. Interestingly enough, the USB keyboard and mouse would work perfectly in safe mode, just not when Windows was running in native mode. So I really wanted to save this drive, but unfortunately it wasn't going to happen with this particular installation of Windows 98. So I decided to start from scratch and just install Windows 98 from the installation CD. Okay, so trying to resurrect this system turned out to be a lost cause as far as the operating system is concerned. I really wanted to save the data on the drive, but given the fact that it looks like it's an amalgamation of perhaps several upgrades and the drivers weren't working, I decided to cut my losses and just install Windows 98 from scratch. So all the drivers are installed. Let's see if it works. The screen certainly looks good. I just installed the sound card drivers, which you have to reboot a few times for them to actually work. So let's see if we get some sound out of this thing. Oh, there's the Windows startup sound, and I don't know if you can hear that. We've got sound for the welcome screen. Nice. Yeah, so it looks like everything is working. And what I found as I was installing the drivers was that this screen with the correct driver will support, I don't think I tried it on the Astro, but this will definitely support 1024 by 768 resolution. So really readable. All the graphics look great, nice and crisp, no problems with the LCD screen. And yeah, having this higher resolution actually makes things a lot more usable, especially considering that this screen would probably have been a little bit closer to the user compared to the CRT. I think people probably would have brought this up closer to their keyboard. And so now you can see things really, really well. Okay, so with that in mind, let's just go ahead and, let's go ahead and play a little Doom, make sure that that runs. But it should work exactly like the Astro. I don't expect to hear any music, but let's just go ahead and start it and see if it works. And I must say, it does look really nice, crisp, and sharp on this LCD screen as compared to the, ooh, that's a little loud. There we go. That's a little bit better. And there's no music, so that doesn't matter. I'm sure there must be a way to get the music working on this, but I certainly haven't found a way. So let's go ahead and start a new game. And I've got this set up for mouse and keyboard control. So we should be able to, yeah, I got some help there. There we go. Things seem to be working. And actually, I'm using a trackball. If you've noticed through the episode, I've been going back and forth between different mice just to see if I could get one to work reliably, or maybe a different driver would load or something. But anyway, I ended up using this trackball for Doom here, and this actually makes it really fun to play. I used to use these back in the day. Mine was a little different. It had the ball on the side, but these are great for playing games like this. Yeah, so that's Doom on this Gateway Profile 2. Certainly it runs fine. I wish the music was there, but no luck on that. Perhaps there's some stuff that I can do or additional drivers I can get to make this sound card work, but I'm not, it's not going to be the best sound card in any case, but it is working. So yeah, too bad I couldn't save the data. Save the hard drive intact, but loading Windows 98 on here certainly worked, and everything runs a lot quicker now. So I'm guessing that there was some either corrupt registry settings or corrupt perhaps some corrupt drivers or something else going on here, because it certainly wasn't running as fast as this before. I don't think it's just down to fragmentation on the hard drive. This thing was running really slow. So it's really nice to get this up and running reliably. And there you go, 2 systems that are completely working now that both just need the battery replaced. So it's a big lesson to everybody out there. Make sure the first thing you do is replace those batteries, especially on mid 90s to 2005 type systems like these that have the little CMOS battery in there. You might end up with a BIOS that just will not work unless you replace the battery. So my hat's off to LGR for showing me that, because it worked on both of these systems. The one that he did over here, the Gateway Astro, is working fine, and I was able to bump up the resolution to 1024 by 768. It's not quite as clear as the other system, but it does work. And I went ahead and put the screensaver back on this that the original owner had. Can't remember what it's called, something about water. And then on this one, I put the screensaver inside your computer, because that was always one of my favorites. A little more geeky, and I really enjoyed it. I spent way too long trying to see if I could get save the hard drive on the Profile 2. I spent about a week on it, not including the time that I was off at a conference. And as you can see probably from the beginning, my beard has even grown in a little bit fuller since I first started recording this episode. But I've got to say, I'm really happy with the way these turned out. Both displays are looking great. I would not recommend picking one of these up if you are afraid of hard work and a lot of it to get in there to change that battery on that motherboard. That was probably the worst case I've ever worked on in terms of trying to get the case itself opened up and get all those screws out. I still have over here a pile of screws that I didn't bother to put back in because they weren't needed. There was way too many screws in there. I've got 2 screws left to use to put the back cover on the hard drive, but I'm just going to have a pile of extra screws left over. And I've carried this thing around. I moved it around on the table. It's solid as ever. So those missing screws aren't going to hurt anything. I want to thank everybody who subscribed to the channel. I got a big boost in subscribers with the last video that I did, the salvaging PC parts. So I'll try to do some more PC videos in the future. And I still have, sitting right over there, a pile of Mac 2s, Mac 2 CIs and SIs, things of that vintage that I want to do a repairathon on, as well as some interesting Atari videos coming up, because it is the Atari's 50th anniversary this year. And so I want to do a couple dedicated videos on those. If you want to see those, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. That will tell me that you like the content, and it'll also help you see that in your feed, or hit the notification bell. I was never a fan of the notification bell until recently, when I started losing track of some of my favorite channels, and turning on that notification bell really did make a difference. So I went from not caring about it to suddenly thinking, hey, this is pretty cool. My favorite channels are going to get that notification bell. And if you want to support the channel, there's always Patreon. And I thank all my patrons for their support. Their names are going to be coming up in the credits, and they'll get some bonus commentary at the end of this episode. All right, all that nasty stuff out of the way, but I really do appreciate everybody's support. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Patrons receive ad-free and early access to content after the episode commentary, and of course, your name in the credits. If you liked that episode, here's a few more you might enjoy, and I thank you for your support.
End of line.